Hello. This week, Parashat Ki-Tisa, we will talk a little bit about the sin of the golden calf, or one aspect of it. There are many midrashim about the sin of the golden calf, and today we will not talk about the essence of the sin, sort of what it meant. But I do want to talk about a famous midrash that talks about some of the technical aspects that had to do with how the sin came about. So, the verses tell us that Vayar ha'am ki boshesh Moshe lavo. The people saw that Moshe was late. Actually, the term late is a bit too specific. It just says that he was taking his time. And then they said, well, we got to manage on our own now. Moshe is not here anymore. So what are we going to do? And then the whole thing spun out of control as they began to press Aharon to make for them the golden calf. And the Midrash actually goes into a great length to show, the Midrash says about this, I think Rashi quotes this Midrash, that Moshe was just a few hours late, and he wasn't even late. It's just that he had told them it would take 40 days, and they interpreted it at the beginning of the 40th day he'll come down, and he was going to come down like 6 hours later or something along those lines. And so just because of this miscalculation, they decided that Moshe is not coming back, and we're going to go and make the golden calf. And the way I usually understood this midrash has always been to say something along the lines of, if only we would have waited a little bit, just been a bit patient, everything would have been different. Okay, and sort of a little musar there to tell you, don't give up so easily. Don't just look at the price you pay for jumping to conclusions. In fact, the Midrash in other places goes to even further lengths to talk about the terrible calamity that this sin was, in that if Am Yisrael would not have sinned here, they might have actually gone straight into Israel, built a Mikdash, and lived happily ever after in a perfect world. And so by this one sin, everything got completely ruined. And so, there are midrashim that take that position and probably attach themselves to this midrash I just mentioned that talks about that near miss, that or a near hit that we always had, where that we almost had, that we could have had sort of a perfect record at Sinai, and just because of a bit of impatience, we did not. So today, I want to take that midrash and spin it almost completely the other way. And you'll see in a moment how. And we're going to do that using another midrash. I'm quoting right now from the Midrash Rabbah, but this same midrash appears in slightly different wording, perhaps, in the Tanchuma. It says the following thing: when God sees that the people have sinned, he turns to Moshe and tells him, Lech red ki shichet amcha. Go down, for your people have sinned. Other midrashim focus on the association of the people with Moshe. Why are they Moshe's people? Why not God's people? But here we'll talk about the following midrash. It says the following. Here we go. One second. לכד אמר רבי אבין, אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא למשה, אל ירע לך על שאמרתי לך לך רד מכאן, שהרי בית ג' פעמים כביכול ירדתי מן השמיים לארץ בשביל לראות בכלכלת הבריות. So don't worry about the fact that you need to go down now. I've also come down to see bad things that were done. שנאמר, וירד השם לראות את העיר ואת המגדל, הווה נרדה, ארדנה ויראה. So here we have quotations about sins that God had come down to see. These are all quotes from Bereshit, from Genesis. And the first two are quotes about the Tower of Babel, and the other one is about the city of Sodom and Amorah. אף אתה לך רד, דיו לעבד להיות שווה לקונו. You too go down, you too descend from the mountain, just as I descended in the past. The slave, the servant, should be at least sort of have to go through this just like his master had to go through it. And then the Midrash continues, it says, Vayikach Moshe et Aaron v'et Miriam v'et Aaron v'et Miriam v'et Aaron v'et Miriam v'et Aaron 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 v כיוון שראה משה כן, אמר אין סליחה. When Moses saw that they had sinned, he said, there's no forgiveness. We're all lost. It's doomed. The whole project is over. ידע הקדוש ברוך הוא מה בליבו של משה. God knew what was in Moshe's heart. וקרא אותו לפייסו, and called him to calm him down. אמר לו, לא אמרתי לך עד שאתה בסנה? Didn't I tell you back in the sneh, in the burning bush, מה שעתידין לעשות? What they shall do? שנאמר, ויאמר השם ראו ראיתי. As it says, God said, I have seen. It says, ראו ראיתי. I saw, I have seen. Okay, so the same root twice. אמר הקדוש ברוך הוא למשה, אתה רואה ראייה אחת, ואני רואה שתי ראיות. You see one sight and I see two. אתה רואה אותם באים לסיני ומקבלים תורתי. You see them coming to Sinai and getting the Torah. ואני רואה אותם שאחר שעברו לסיני ליתן להם את התורה, etc. הם מתבוננים בו ושומטין אחד מהם ומכעיסין אותי בו. I see that when they come to get the Torah, after they receive it, they shall drop it, they shall defile it, and get me, and anger me. Okay, that's the Midrash and the Midrash Rabbah. So there's sort of two parts of the Midrash. One part talks about this going down, this descending that God is commanding Moshe to do, to descend just as he had descended. And the other one has to do with the fact that Moshe is upset, and God tells him, don't be upset. This is something that I foresaw. Okay, so God foresaw the sin of the golden calf. Didn't send Moshe the memo about this issue, but God foresaw the sin, and He knows that there's a way out. So don't worry. So what does this midrash mean? And specifically, what does the first part of the midrash mean? What does it mean? I descended, so should you. What does that mean? The midrash here is pointing us back to Bereshit. And the first two out of the three, and it seems from here, perhaps that there may have been actually only two verses at some point in one of the versions here, but that there were the sins of Bereshit are the ones that are being pointed to when God had to descend and see the Tower of Babel. First of all, the Tower of Babel, according to many, involved some form of idol worship. So you may say that there's a connection here between the two stories. But we're not going to go down that way. We'll take a bit of a broader view of what happens in Genesis. If you think about some of the sins in Genesis, everything that leads up basically to the Tower of Babel and its aftermath, they're very special sins. They're special in many, many ways, partly in the sense that they relate to a universe or to an existence that we are not familiar with. Okay, so we don't understand definitely what it was to live in Gan Eden, in Eden, when Adam and Eve were alive, and a world which can undergo a flood, a world in which the flood killed the animals because the animals had sinned, according to some midrashim. Also very difficult to understand. And also a world like the Tower of Babel, where the people of Israel, all the people have one language and they all work together. It's also difficult for us to comprehend that sense of that level of social unity and its dangers, its potential, and that kind of existence. And so basically until that point, until Avraham comes along, there's sort of this period which you might, I've heard somebody refer to it once as some form of biblical prehistory, where sort of things are done and are happening, and they're not necessarily something we have a good frame of reference for. Okay, which is why there's a lot of mystery about what happened in all those events. But if you think about it, one of the things about all those sins, because of that, because we're so far removed from that type of existence, and since then things have been more or less normal, what we would call. It stands to reason that on some deep theological, mystical level, God had never had any intention for that existence to survive. Okay? God creates Adam and puts him in the Garden of Eden, and then the rest of the world is supposed to be not populated forever. And God's plan is so flawed that Adam sins immediately, and there's this snake in the garden that's going to convince Adam, and all these other weird things that we don't fully, they appear weird, and that we don't fully understand. So it seems that there's like something about that where Adam and Eve, or the people in the time of Noah, there was something about the system which was almost designed, it was so perfect that it was designed to fail. We'll talk maybe more about this when we get to back to Bereshit next year. But the important thing about this observation is that it's, in a sense, God is creating the world, and there is this trial and error period where God doesn't need to learn it for himself, but the process in which God gives us, humanity, or some chosen people in humanity, opportunities, and we either succeed or fail and learn from those mistakes, that seems to be a recurring phenomenon, also later on in the Jewish existence. After all that happened, Avraham is chosen, and after Noach and Tower of Babel, Avraham comes into the picture, and from that point on, God stops talking to the whole universe, or to the whole world that he created, and focuses on the people of Israel. And it seems as if almost we're trying to do round two. Whereas before God tried to create the perfect world, and through that perfect world, and that approach failed, and sort of, again, God of course knew the future, but the failure is there to teach us a lesson. Now too, God is trying to create the perfect people. Okay, he's focusing on the people, starting from a family, from Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and then finally in Shmot, focusing on the people. And so when we finally reach Ma'amad al-Sinai and giving of the Torah, we're at that point of perfection. We're at this point where everything is perfect, right? The people of Israel have just come out. They were slaves, so they didn't have their own choices. They weren't in charge of their own fate, and they didn't have any leadership. But now finally there's Moshe, the greatest prophet of all, bringing them to Mount Sinai, giving them the Torah. Everything is perfect. And like the MyDrash says, if you just walk into Israel and build the Mikdash, we're done, right? No more the end of history. We're all done. Everything will be perfect from here and on. And so here comes God, and it says, I have two sights. I foresaw that they will sin here. Now you can say God just foresaw the future, which of course God knew the future. But there's something more here. God is maybe also saying to Moshe, Moshe, you only saw them coming and getting the Torah. You thought it would be all over. You thought, they get the Torah, and we're done. It's perfect. But I'm telling you, I have experience. Okay? Just like I went down there, just like I had to descend to the earth back in those days, now you need to descend. What does that mean? God's descending is, in a sense, God saying, I thought, just like you have some sort of an appliance at home. If you have a blender, you have a microwave, and you put it on, you just turn your back on it. You don't need to watch it all the time. You know that it's going to work. You can trust it to work. When God first created the world, he was supposedly surprised when things started to not work. I'm saying supposedly because, again, it's all, as I've said many times in this recording, everything we say about God's mistakes or learning curve doesn't really make sense. But that process is there to teach us. God gives us opportunities, and we either succeed or fail to meet those opportunities, to make the most of them. And so when God descends, it means God saying, look at this. Things aren't working out as they're supposed to. And so he's saying to Moshe, now you have to go through that process. I've done this before. I know already from my quote-unquote experience from the past that these perfect moments don't last. Why they don't last is a very good question. But it would seem that, in a sense, everything gets old. Everything becomes cliche if you don't maintain it, if you don't reinfuse it with meaning and with spiritual content. And so this is a lesson that Moshe has to learn. And God is saying to Moshe, I've done this before, now you have to do it. You're my servant, you need to go do it. What does that mean? God is saying, look, as time goes on, I, God, am removing myself from direct management of the world. Back in the days of Genesis, I would go down and destroy the world and rebuild it over here. Even here I ask you, would you like me to directly intervene? Maybe I should destroy the people of Israel and and then come back and just make you into a great people. And you tell me, no, I want to, work within the system. And so I tell you, fine. The system is you are their leader. You are now my representative over here. And so you need to go take care of this. You need to go learn what happens over here. Okay? So that's the meaning of this midrash. And now let's get back to the midrash in which I opened, which talks about how there's this small delay. And because of that small delay and the fact that people of Israel were impatient, that is why everything went wrong. What does that mean? Meaning, is it really that? Is it just trying to tell me about impatience? I'd like to propose something a bit different. As we just said, if we're right, and if there is this comparison between the sin of the golden calf with regards to Israel, and the sins of the first generations with regard to the entire world, then this sin had to happen too. This was also a very, very high peak, and a very high bar that was set for the people of Israel. The moment of giving the Torah, it was almost obvious that they would eventually sin, that they would, that they would not know how to maintain that level of spirituality, and that when it comes down, it will come down crashing. If you think about the story about them not being patient enough, so what's the story? They think that Moshe was supposed to come down, and they can't even wait a few hours until Moshe, just to check, just to see what happens. Why is that? Meaning, really, you can't be too patient. You can't just wait a bit. The answer is, of course, that this wasn't. Almost has to be that it wasn't like they were okay with it until this day, and then suddenly they snapped. Obviously, with Moshe, the most prominent figure in Israeli politics at the time, probably the only one, because there was no Mishkan yet, there was no Aaron, no nothing. When Moshe disappears, people get a bit anxious because their leader, the one who led them out of Egypt, is no longer present. And 1 day passes, 2 days passes, 10 days, 20 days, 30 days. At some point, you're going to snap. If Moshe had been away for a week and then been late a few hours, it probably wouldn't have made a difference. If Moshe had been late, 2 weeks, it also would have been manageable. But 40 days, that was already too much. By that point, if he wasn't going to come, then people were just going to snap. They weren't willing to wait. They were, as it is, they were probably overflowing with anxiety and paranoia. My theory is as follows. Hashem could have taught Moshe the Torah in almost any amount of time he chose. Obviously, God is omnipotent, and what he chooses to teach is up to him, and how he chooses to teach is up to him. But clearly, God, omnipotent, could have done anything that God felt like. He could have taught Moshe in a day, or in a week, or in a month, or in a year. All up to God. Whatever limitations humanity has, God could, of course, overcome them if he wished to do so. I would like to propose that God chose that amount of time, that 40 days, beyond the symbolic importance of it. He chose it on purpose in order to reach this climax, in order to generate this this crisis. Because if God says, I have 2 sites, I know that there's going to be a crisis. I know that they're going to come, they're going to get the Torah, and I know that they're going to afterwards leave the Torah. They're going to betray me, and they'll have to go through the process of tshuva, repentance, of forgiveness. And God says, well, if it's going to happen, it's going to be on my own terms. I'm going to generate the crisis. I'm going to keep Moshe up there as long as I need, exactly to make it so that they're exactly at the tipping point where they have that choice. They fail, and we punish them and everything. Imagine what would have happened, just for a moment, if whatever crisis would have occurred, would not have happened here, but a few weeks later after they left Sinai. So there's no Sinai. There's no place to get the tablets again. You have to create a whole new show of lights and sounds and get the Torah, download the Torah from the heavens. For whatever reason, we can't know what reason, but Hashem said, if there's going to be a crisis, it's going to be now. And I'm going to generate it. I'm going to make sure that it's exactly right. The timing is perfect so that they fail. I could have done it less. I could have waited longer and postponed the crisis to later. Or I could have waited longer and just, have it happen, and Moshe would still be in the middle of learning Torah and not be down there in time. No, I'm going to cut it exactly right. so that Moshe comes down. So this is not just a case in which the people of Israel were losing patience. It also seems to me that God pushed them to the limit on purpose. Because if God says, I know there's going to be a crisis, and if God, as the teacher says, this crisis is important, we have to pass through it, we have to move on, then God can generate a crisis by doing it like this. So, to conclude, if we look back at all that we've reviewed today, I think that the message that we take from this whole thing goes back to that famous question about how it's possible that the people of Israel just recently at Mount Sinai getting the Torah can sin. And I think that the answer is pretty clear from what we see here, and that is that there are certain levels of spirituality which we yearn for, but they will never be a steady state position if you don't constantly maintain them. You can't sort of reach that plateau and remain there and never fall unless you continuously work at it. There's a famous midrash, not famous midrash, but a famous vort, I believe by the Gaon of Vilna, who says about the Shir Shel Yom on Sunday, where we say, Mi Ya'aleh B'Har Hashem, U'mi Yakum B'Mkom Kodsho. Who shall go up to the mountain of God, and who shall stand up in that place? And he stands up as in maintain that level, saying it's more difficult to maintain the level than to go up. You can go up, but to maintain the level is difficult. It's even more difficult than the work up, because there's no change, there's no difference, there's nothing new about it. That doesn't sort of draw you. And so the message for us is really that in order for our lives to be full with content, with meaning, of course, with the meaning of the Torah, we need to constantly work at making it new, making it interesting, delving into its depths, constantly sort of like revealing its meaning and meaning for us, in order to maintain a high spiritual tension, and never to forget that without that maintenance, things only by nature, by the force of entropy, will fall apart. So that's it. Shabbat Shalom.